They say you never truly know someone until you share a tragedy with them. In my case, that tragedy was waking up from emergency spinal surgery to discover my husband of 18 years had moved his 27-year-old assistant into our home. My name is Katherine Harmon, and this is the story of how the man who vowed to stand by me in sickness and in health betrayed me at my lowest moment, and how he froze when he discovered my signature was the only thing standing between him and a $120 million company merger. Before we jump in, tell me where you're tuning in from in the comments below. And if this story resonates with you, make sure you hit that subscribe button because tomorrow I'm sharing something that could save you from making the same devastating mistakes I did. I still remember the pain, not just the physical agony of vertebrae fused together with titanium rods after my car accident, but the sharp, breathtaking anguish of betrayal, the kind that makes your stomach hollow and your chest tight, the kind no amount of hospital-grade morphine can touch. "Katherine, you need to rest," my sister Elaine said, her face tight with worry as she adjusted my pillows. She'd flown in from Phoenix the moment she heard about my accident, leaving her own family and responsibilities behind to be by my side. The doctor said movement could compromise the fusion. "Where's Grant?" I asked, for what must have been the dozenth time since. Waking up in recovery, my husband's absence felt wrong, a discordant note in the symphony of beeping machines and antiseptic smells. "He said he'd be here when I woke up." Elaine's pause lasted a heartbeat too long. "He had an emergency at the office, something about the Westlake merger timeline being moved up." Even through the fog of post-surgical medication, I knew she was lying. Grant Harmon, founder and CEO of Harmon Tech Solutions, never missed an opportunity to remind everyone that his business ran like clockwork, whether he was present or not. "That's why I hired competent people," he'd say with that self-satisfied smile that had once charmed me but lately just made me tired. "Show me your phone," I said to Elaine. "Kat, please." "Now, Elaine." She hesitated, then handed over her iPhone, with the resignation of someone who knew resistance was futile. I'd always been the stubborn one, the fighter. She'd always been the peacemaker. I swiped through her recent text messages until I found Grant's name. "Can't make it to the hospital today. Veronica needed help moving the last of her things. Tell Katherine I'll try to come by tomorrow. Make sure she takes the pain meds on schedule." The clinical detachment of his message made my surgical incision throb with fresh pain. Veronica Blake, his executive assistant of 8 months. The one he'd insisted on hiring despite her conspicuous lack of qualifications. The one whose Instagram I'd found myself scrolling through at 3 a.m., comparing her yoga-toned body to my own middle-aged frame, then hating myself for the comparison. "Who's moving where?" I asked, my voice unnaturally calm. Elaine took her phone back gently, her eyes not meeting mine. "Kat, let's talk about this when you're stronger." "I'm not a child." "Elaine, tell me what's happening." She sank into the vinyl hospital chair, suddenly looking every day of her 53 years. "Grant told me 2 days ago, while you were still in intensive care. He said with your recovery timeline being uncertain, it made sense for Veronica to move into the guest house temporarily, to help with your care when you come home." The laugh that escaped me sounded foreign to my own ears, brittle and dangerous. My husband moved his mistress into our home while I was in surgery fighting. For my life? He claims she's not? Don't. I held up my hand, IV tube swaying with the movement. Just don't. The monitor beside me began beeping more rapidly as my heart rate increased. A nurse appeared in the doorway, concerned. "Everything okay in here? Your vitals are spiking, Mrs. Harmon." "I'm fine," I lied. "Just tried to move and felt a twinge." After the nurse left, having adjusted my medication and shot Elaine a warning look about keeping me calm, I closed my eyes and felt hot tears slide down my temples into my hair. "I want you to do something for me," I said finally, eyes still closed, because I couldn't bear to see the pity on my sister's face. "Anything." "I need you to call Lawrence Patel," Elaine's confusion was audible. Your company lawyer? Kat, is this really the time to worry about work? Just call him. Tell him to come here tomorrow morning with the papers we discussed last month. He'll know what you mean. What papers? What are you planning? I opened my eyes then, finding a clarity that cut through the medication haze. I'm planning to remember who I was before I became Mrs. Grant Harmon. Lawrence Patel arrived at precisely 9 a.m. the next morning, his silver-streaked hair impeccably groomed and his leather briefcase buffed to a shine that matched his custom shoes. He'd been my personal attorney for over a decade, long before I'd met Grant. He was one of the few people who remembered Catherine Mills, the ambitious software engineer who'd founded Mills Integration Systems in her garage studio apartment, before she became Katherine Harmon, wife of the more successful, more celebrated Grant Harmon. You look terrible, he said bluntly, setting his briefcase on the rolling hospital tray. Always the charmer, Lawrence. I never saw the point in sugarcoating reality. He removed his glasses, polishing them with a monogrammed handkerchief. Your sister said it was urgent. I assume this has something to do with the prenuptial amendment we discussed last month? I nodded, adjusting my position slightly and wincing at the stab of pain. I want to finalize it now. Lawrence's expression didn't change, but his eyes sharpened. Any particular reason for the urgency? Grant moved his 27-year-old assistant into our guest house while I was unconscious from emergency spinal surgery. Does that qualify as a particular reason? If Lawrence was surprised, he didn't show it. That's why I'd always trusted him, his unflappable demeanor in the face of both business and personal chaos. It certainly accelerates our timeline, he agreed, opening his briefcase and removing a folder. I brought the documents as you requested. The amendment to your prenuptial agreement that explicitly outlines your continued ownership stake in Mills Integration Systems, regardless of your marital status. I took the papers with hands that trembled slightly. From medication or emotion, I wasn't sure. And the Westlake merger? Still progressing. The due diligence is nearly complete. Final contracts are being drafted as we speak. The Westlake merger, a $120 million deal that would integrate Harmon Tech Solutions with Westlake Systems, creating one of the largest enterprise software companies in the Northwest. A merger Grant had been pursuing relentlessly for the past 18 months, convinced it would be his legacy. What he didn't know, what I had never corrected his assumption about, was that 20 years ago, when Mills Integration Systems was struggling and Harmon Tech was flourishing, I had maintained one client relationship that had proven unexpectedly valuable. Westlake Systems had been my first major contract. Harold Westlake himself had taken a chance on my fledgling company when no one else would. When Grant and I married and eventually merged our business operations, I had transferred most of my clients and patents to the Harmon Tech portfolio. But the Westlake relationship had remained technically under Mills Integration, a detail buried in legal paperwork that Grant, with his dismissive attitude toward the small fish I'd brought to our marriage, had never bothered to verify. His current merger couldn't proceed without the formal inclusion of Mills Integration Systems as a party to the transaction, without my signature. Have you told him? Lawrence asked, watching me scan the documents. That I know about his betrayal, or that I hold the key to his precious merger? Either. Both. I signed the prenuptial amendment with a flourish that sent pain shooting through my spine. No. And I'd like to keep it that way. For now. Lawrence took the papers back, his expression carefully neutral. Catherine, are you certain this is how you want to proceed? 18 years is a long time to waste on a man who moved his mistress into my home while I was fighting for my life? The bitterness in my voice surprised even me. Yes, Lawrence, I'm certain. He nodded once, tucking the signed documents back into his briefcase. Then, as your attorney, I suggest you consider your next steps carefully. The revelation about your control over the Westlake relationship is a significant piece of leverage. How and when you choose to deploy it matters. I'm aware. And as your friend, he continued, his voice softening almost imperceptibly, I suggest you remember who you were before Grant Harmon came into your life. The Catherine Mills I met 22 years ago wouldn't let a betrayal define her. She'd use it as fuel. The reminder of my younger self, ambitious, fearless, untethered, brought unexpected tears to my eyes. That Catherine didn't have titanium, rods holding her spine together. Lawrence stood, straightening his immaculate suit jacket. No, she didn't. She had something better. She had nothing to lose and everything to prove. Perhaps this Catherine could learn something from her. After he left, I lay back against the hospital pillows, my mind clearer than it had been since before the accident. Grant hadn't visited once in the 3 days since my surgery. His absence told me everything I needed to know about the state of our marriage, about his priorities, about the future I could expect if I simply accepted what was happening. I reached for my phone, ignoring the stab of pain the movement caused, and called Maggie Chen, my oldest friend and the CFO of Mills Integration Systems, before we'd folded it into Harmon Tech. Kat, she answered on the first ring. How are you feeling? I've been so worried. I need you, I interrupted. I need your help. Her response was immediate, without hesitation. Name it. How quickly can you get to Seattle? And how much do you remember about our original integration architecture for Westlake systems? There was a pause, and I could almost see her quick mind connecting the dots. I can be on a plane tomorrow morning, and I remember everything. It was our first big break. Why? Because I'm about to remind my husband exactly who he married, I said, a plan already forming, and who he betrayed. Grant finally appeared at the hospital the following afternoon, bringing a bouquet of lilies that he knew I was allergic to, and an air of distracted concern that didn't quite reach his eyes. At 49, he was still handsome in that polished, corporate way, silver threading through his dark hair at exactly the right temples, his body maintained by expensive personal trainers, his smile practiced to show the precise amount of whitened teeth. You're looking better, he said, setting the flowers well away from my bed after a pointed look from Elaine. The doctors say the surgery went well. No thanks to you, Elaine muttered, earning a sharp glance from Grant. Don't you have somewhere to be? He asked her, his tone making it clear it wasn't really a question. Actually, I do, she replied, gathering her purse. Maggie's flight gets in at 4, and I promise to pick her up. Grant's attention snapped fully to me for the first time. Maggie Chen, your old CFO? Why is she coming here? I smiled, feeling the first flutter of satisfaction at his confusion. I invited her. I miss my friends. His eyes narrowed slightly. You should be focusing on your recovery, not socializing. Oh, I am, I assured him. In fact, focused is exactly what I am now. After Elaine left, an uncomfortable silence filled the hospital room. Grant checked his watch 3 times in 5 minutes, scrolled through emails on his phone, adjusted his tie. Anywhere to look but directly at me. How's the merger coming along? I asked finally, my voice deliberately casual. His expression brightened, always eager to discuss his business triumphs. We're in the final stages. The Westlake team has been surprisingly accommodating. Harold's son is more reasonable than his father ever was. James Westlake, I mused. I remember when he was just an intern, following his father around to client meetings, taking notes. Grant nodded absently, missing the significance. He's running things now. Old Harold retired to some island in the South Pacific. Bora Bora, I said. His wife Marianne always wanted to live there. This made Grant pause, looking at me more carefully. How would you know that? I smiled, adjusting my position slightly. Oh, just something he mentioned once, years ago. You know how clients like to talk. Before Grant could pursue this line of questioning, his phone rang. He glanced at the screen, then at me. I need to take this. It's about the merger. By all means. He stepped into the hallway, but the door didn't close completely behind him. I could hear the tension in his voice as he spoke. What do you mean? There's a problem with the Mills integration assets. That's been part of Harmon Tech for years. No, I don't have separate documentation for that specific relationship. Because it was a minor integration we did years ago, James won't care about the technical details. I closed my eyes, savoring the moment. Lawrence had made his move, placing the first roadblock in Grant's path. The Westlake legal team would now be requesting specific documentation about the Mills integration relationship. Documentation Grant didn't have because he'd never bothered to properly finalize that part of our business merger, assuming it was insignificant. When he returned to the room, his face was tight with controlled frustration. I need to head back to the office. There's a small technical issue with the merger documentation. Anything serious? I asked innocently. Nothing I can't handle, he replied, already moving toward the door. Some confusion about the old Mills integration contracts. You know, I said, just as he reached for the handle, I might still have copies of those in my home office. In the filing cabinet you wanted me to get rid of last year. He turned back, reassessing me with new interest. Do you? Possibly. It's hard to remember all the paperwork from back then. If only there was someone who could check for me while I'm stuck here. Oh, wait. I let my eyes widen in mock realization. Veronica's at the house now, isn't she? Maybe she could look. The color drained from Grant's face so quickly I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Katherine. Save it, Grant. I adjusted my bed to a more upright position, ignoring the pain the movement caused. We both know why she's there. What I want to know is whether you actually thought I wouldn't find out, or if you just didn't care if I did. He sighed, rubbing a hand over his face in the gesture I'd seen 1,000 times when he was recalculating his approach to a difficult negotiation. It's not what you think, he said finally. She needed a place to stay after her breakup, and with your accident I thought having someone at the house who could help with your recovery would be practical. Practical, I repeated, the word tasting like ash. Always the pragmatist. We can discuss this when you're feeling better, he said, his tone shifting to the patronizing one he used when he wanted to end a conversation. Right now, I need to handle this merger issue. Yes, you do, I agreed. And when you've figured out exactly what documentation you're missing and why it matters, come back and we can have a real conversation about our future. Something in my tone must have alerted him that this wasn't the compliant, agreeable Katherine he'd grown accustomed to over our years together. He studied me for a long moment, calculation visible behind his eyes. What do you know about this cat? I smiled, a genuine smile that felt foreign on my face after days of pain and betrayal. I know that 18 years is a long time to forget who you married, Grant. But don't worry, I'm about to remind you. After he left, I texted Maggie. He took the bait. Are you ready? Her response came immediately. Already working on it. By the time I land, I'll have everything we need. I set the phone down, leaned back against the pillows, and allowed myself to feel the full weight of what I was setting in motion. The path ahead would be painful, perhaps even more painful than my physical recovery. But for the first time since waking up from surgery to discover my husband's betrayal, I felt something other than despair. I felt powerful. Preparing and narrating. This story took us a lot of time and research, I say to the camera, breaking the fourth wall for a moment. So if you're enjoying it so far, please like this video. It truly means a lot to us. Now, back to how I discovered my husband's betrayal was even deeper than I initially realized, and how I used the leverage I never knew I had to turn the tables on the man who thought I was too broken to fight back. The hospital released me 5 days after my surgery. 5 days of beeping machines, hourly vital checks, and physical therapists coaching me through excruciating movements that left me drenched in sweat. 5 days during which my husband visited. Exactly twice, once after discovering the Westlake merger issue, and once with the hospital administrator who happened to be on the Harmon Tech Solutions Board of Directors. "We've arranged for a home health nurse," Grant announced during that second visit, his tone suggesting I should be grateful for his thoughtfulness. "She'll come by every morning to help with your exercises and medication management." "That won't be necessary," I replied, signing the discharge paperwork the nurse had brought. "Elaine is staying with me for the next 2 weeks, and Maggie will be there as well." The administrator, Dr. Winters, smiled broadly. "How wonderful to have such support, Mrs. Harmon. Though I must say, having professional medical oversight during this critical recovery phase would be advisable." What neither of them said aloud, what hovered in the air between us like a toxic cloud, was that Grant had likely promised Dr. Winters additional donations to the hospital's new cardiac wing in exchange for this performance of concern. "And where will your friends be staying?" Grant asked, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. "The house isn't exactly set up for multiple guests right now." "They'll be in the main guest rooms," I replied, meeting his gaze directly. "I'm sure Veronica won't mind moving her things back to her own apartment." Dr. Winters looked between us, sensing the tension but misinterpreting its source. "Well, I'll leave you two to sort out the domestic arrangements. Mrs. Harmon, please don't hesitate to call if you need anything at all during your recovery." After he left, Grant moved closer to my bed, lowering his voice. "This is childish, Katherine. Veronica is there to help with your recovery. Is that why her lingerie is in the bathroom cabinet where I keep my facial products?" Elaine had sent me pictures during her reconnaissance of the house, preparing it for my return. Or why her monogrammed "towels have replaced mine in the master bathroom"? Was she planning to help me shower while wearing my robe? Grant's face flushed, not with shame, but with the annoyance of a man caught in a lie he thought beneath him to maintain. "This isn't the time or place for this conversation." "No," I agreed. "It's not. The time was before you moved your mistress into our home while I was in surgery. The place was anywhere except the hospital where I'm recovering from nearly being paralyzed." "You're being dramatic. And you're being served," I interrupted as Lawrence Patel entered the room, his timing impeccable as always. Grant turned, his expression shifting from irritation to wariness at the sight of my attorney. "Lawrence, what brings you here?" "Official business, I'm afraid." Lawrence handed Grant a thick envelope. "These are the updated terms of the prenuptial agreement between you and Mrs. Harmon, which she has already signed. You'll find the key provisions flagged for your convenience." Grant didn't open the envelope, his knuckles whitening as he gripped it. "What kind of game are you playing, Katherine?" "The kind where I stop being a pawn in yours," I replied calmly. "You have 24 hours to review the documents with your own counsel. The provisions take effect whether you sign or not, as they simply clarify existing terms rather than creating new ones. But your acknowledgement would streamline things." "Things," he repeated. "What things, exactly?" Lawrence answered for me, his tone professionally detached. "The dissolution of your marriage, should Mrs. Harmon choose to pursue that option, and the protection of her business assets in such an eventuality." The shock on Grant's face might have been comical under different circumstances. For 18 years, I had been the accommodating wife, the silent partner who had allowed her own company to be absorbed into his, who had stepped back from an executive role to support his ambitions, who had smiled at fundraisers and corporate retreats while he basked in the spotlight. "You can't be serious," he said finally. "Over what? Veronica? She means nothing." "That actually makes it worse," I observed. "Now, if you'll excuse us, Lawrence and I have some additional matters to discuss before my discharge." Grant looked between us, calculation replacing shock. "This is about the merger, isn't it? You're trying to leverage whatever documentation issue has come up to. What? Punish me?" "No, Grant," I said, suddenly tired. "This is about me finally recognizing that I've been married to a stranger for 18 years. The merger is just business, something you've always understood far better than marriage. After he left, still clutching the unopened envelope, Lawrence raised an eyebrow. That went about as expected. He didn't even deny it, I said, the reality of Grant's betrayal settling over me anew. Not really. Men like Grant rarely do, Lawrence replied, helping me gather the few personal items Elaine had brought to make my hospital stay more bearable. They consider themselves entitled to their indiscretions. It's the challenge to their control that truly upsets them. Well, I managed a grim smile. He's about to experience a significant loss of control. The ride home from the hospital was a masterclass in agony. Every bump in the road sent shockwaves of pain through my surgically repaired spine, despite the cushions Elaine had arranged in the back seat of her SUV. By the time we pulled into the circular driveway of the lakefront home Grant and I had built 10 years ago, I was sweating and nauseated from the combination of pain and prescription medication. She's still here, Elaine muttered as we approached the house, nodding toward a gleaming red Audi parked near the 3-car garage. Unbelievable. Actually, it's perfect, I replied through gritted teeth. I was hoping for a direct confrontation. Kat, you're in no condition to— I've spent the last decade of my life in no condition to stand up for myself, I interrupted. That ends today. Maggie was waiting at the door, her petite frame and youthful face belying her 52 years and formidable business acumen. Unlike me, she'd never stepped away from her executive career, serving as CFO for 3 different tech companies after leaving Mills Integration. The sight of her, efficient, competent, unapologetically powerful, reminded me painfully of who I had once been. The master bedroom is ready, she said, hugging me with careful gentleness. We've set up a hospital bed in there so you don't have to navigate the regular bed. And Veronica? I asked. Maggie's smile turned predatory. Still in the guest house, packing very slowly. Grant called her while you were en route. The inside of the house looked the same, yet felt entirely foreign, as if I were visiting a museum exhibition of my former life. The open-concept main floor with its wall of windows overlooking Lake Washington, the tasteful decor chosen more for its impression on visitors than for actual comfort, the framed photographs documenting Grant's business achievements with me as a silent accessory in the background. I need to see the damage, I said as Elaine and Maggie helped me toward the bedroom wing. Kat, you need to rest, Elaine protested. The doctor said, I need to see what she did to my home, I insisted, changing direction toward the guest. House connector. I need to see everything. The guest house was technically a separate structure, connected to the main house by a glass-walled corridor that showcased the meticulously landscaped gardens. As we approached, I could see movement through the windows. Veronica Blake, her honey-blonde hair pulled back in a messy bun, half-heartedly placing items into an open suitcase. She looked up as we entered, her expression cycling rapidly from surprise to calculation to an artificial sympathy that made my skin crawl. Katherine, she said, her voice gentle as if addressing a child. You should be resting. Here, let me help you. Don't, I warned, stopping her approach with a raised hand. Don't pretend we're anything to each other except what we are. A wife and her husband's mistress. Veronica's perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose. I'm Grant's executive assistant. I was simply staying here to help with household management during your recovery. Is that why you have a drawer full of lingerie in my guest bathroom? I asked, nodding toward the open drawer visible from where we stood. For household management? Her cheeks flushed, but her expression remained defiant. Grant invited me to stay. This is his house, too. Actually, Maggie interjected, the ownership documents list this property solely in Katherine's name. A tax strategy Grant implemented 8 years ago to protect assets from potential business liabilities. The flash of surprise on Veronica's face told me she hadn't known this detail, that Grant had presented himself to her as more generous, more in control than he actually was. I don't want to argue, Veronica said, resuming her packing with newfound Urgency. I'll be out within the hour. No rush, I replied, the words surprising even me. I'd like to understand exactly what happened while I was fighting for my life in the hospital. She paused, a silk blouse suspended between suitcase and closet. Nothing happened, Katherine. You're upset and looking for someone to blame. When did it start? I asked, ignoring her deflection. Before or after he promoted you from receptionist to executive assistant with no qualifications beyond an undergraduate degree in communications and a talent for yoga poses on Instagram. Her expression hardened. You have no idea what qualifications I bring to Harmon Tech. Actually, I do, I countered. I reviewed your personnel file last month when I was updating the company insurance policies. You have precisely zero experience in enterprise software, project management, or executive support. What you do have is a connection to James Westlake from your sorority days at Stanford, which you conveniently failed to mention during your interview. The blood drained from Veronica's face so rapidly I thought she might faint. How did you know that you and James Westlake dated briefly 6 years ago? That you've maintained contact with him through mutual friends? That your sudden appearance at Harmon Tech 8 months ago coincided perfectly with the acceleration of merger talks? Elaine and Maggie exchanged glances, clearly as surprised by this information as Veronica was by my knowledge of it. I don't know what you think you know, Veronica said, her voice shaking slightly. But Grant and I used each other, I finished for her. He used you for access to James Westlake's inner circle, for insights that would help him structure the merger favorably. And you used him for what exactly? A temporary step up? A better position to negotiate once the merger is complete? Or just the thrill of seducing a married CEO twice your age? She abandoned all pretense then, her artificially sympathetic demeanor falling away to reveal cold ambition. You have no idea what Grant has promised me post-merger. While you've been playing housewife for the past decade, I've been positioning myself for actual influence in the new company. And sleeping with my husband was part of that positioning? She shrugged, the gesture dismissive and somehow more hurtful than any words could have been. Grant's been emotionally single for years, Katherine. He told me all about your arrangement, how you'd withdrawn from both the business and your marriage, how you stayed together for appearances while living separate lives. The lie, so complete, so carefully crafted to absolve both Grant and Veronica of guilt, struck me like a physical blow. I gripped Elaine's arm for support, pain radiating through my back as my muscles tensed involuntarily. Get out, I managed, finally. Get out of my house! Gladly, she replied, zipping her suitcase with decisive finality. But you should know, Grant's already looking at divorce attorneys. Once the merger is complete, he won't need the convenient fiction of this marriage anymore. After she left, the silence in the guest house was oppressive. Elaine guided me to a chair, concern etched on her face. Kat, your color is terrible. We need to get you to bed. Not yet, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I need to see the home office first. The home office had once been my sanctuary, the place where I maintained what remained of Katherine Mills, software engineer and entrepreneur, separate from Katherine Harmon, corporate wife. If Grant had violated that space too, I needed to know. The office appeared untouched at first glance. The same organized desk, the same bookshelves lined with technical manuals and industry awards, the same filing cabinets containing paper records. I'd insisted on maintaining despite Grant's mockery of my dinosaur methods. But as I moved farther into the room, supported by Elaine and Maggie, subtle wrongness emerged. The computer had been moved slightly. The filing cabinet drawers didn't align precisely as I always left them. And most telling, the vintage brass, paperweight that had been my grandfather's, the one I polished weekly and always positioned at the exact center of my blotter, was missing. They were in here, I said, sinking carefully into my desk chair. Looking for something. Maggie opened the filing cabinet, quickly assessing its contents. The Westlake folders are still here, all of them. Of course they are, I replied, powered by a cold fury that momentarily eclipsed my physical pain. Grant doesn't even know what he's looking for. He just knows he needs something from Mills Integration to satisfy the Westlake legal team. What exactly is he missing? Elaine asked, perching on the edge of the desk. I smiled grimly. The only copy of the original client agreement exists in digital form, secured in an encrypted file that only I can access. It contains an exclusive, perpetual license provision that Harold Westlake insisted on. Mills Integration would be Westlake Systems' sole integration partner unless both parties agreed in writing to terminate the relationship. Which means, Maggie continued, understanding immediately, that Harmon Tech can't absorb Westlake Systems without Mills Integration being explicitly named as a party to the agreement. And Mills Integration is still legally separate from Harmon Tech, I finished. Grant never bothered with the paperwork to fully dissolve my company after our business merger. He just transferred the assets and clients he considered valuable and left Mills Integration as an empty shell on paper. Except, it wasn't empty, Elaine said, comprehension dawning. The Westlake relationship remained. A relationship now worth $120 million in merger value, I confirmed, and completely dependent on my signature. What will you do? Maggie asked quietly. I ran my fingers over the desk's polished surface, noting the absence of my grandfather's paperweight with renewed anger. First, I'm going to find what they took from my office. Then I'm going to remind my husband exactly who he married and what happens when he underestimates her. And the merger? Elaine pressed. I thought of Veronica's cold ambition, of Grant's casual betrayal, of the life I'd surrendered piece by piece over 18 years of marriage. The merger will proceed, I said finally. But on my terms, not Grant's. And certainly, not on terms that benefit the woman he moved into my home while I was in surgery. As Elaine and Maggie helped me to the bedroom, where the promised hospital bed awaited, I felt the weight of what lay ahead. The physical recovery would be grueling. Months of therapy, pain management, and gradual return to normal movement. But the emotional and professional battle looming would require strength of a different kind altogether. Grant had forgotten who I was before I became his wife. The tenacious engineer who had built a company from nothing, who had faced down skeptical investors and dismissive industry leaders who had earned Harold Westlake's respect through sheer technical brilliance and unwavering integrity. It was time to resurrect that woman. And heaven help anyone who stood in her way. Sleep eluded me that first night home. Despite the hospital-grade pain medication and the comfort of my own space, now purged of Veronica's presence. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Grant's dismissive expression, heard Veronica's cold assessment of my marriage, felt the phantom absence of my grandfather's paperweight, the small but significant violation of my private domain. By 5 a.m., I gave up on rest and asked Elaine to help me to the home office. If sleep wouldn't come, I would at least make productive use of the quiet hours before dawn. You should be resting, Elaine protested, even as she helped me navigate the hallway in my walker. The physical therapist said, "The physical therapist doesn't know what I'm up against," I replied, gritting my teeth against the pain that radiated from my lower back with each careful step. I need to be prepared before Grant returns. The house was still and silent, moonlight streaming through the wall of windows that overlooked the lake. In a different circumstance, at a different time, I might have paused to appreciate the beauty of the water rippling silver beneath the night sky. Now, I saw only reflections of a life built on illusions, a showcase home for a showcase marriage, all surface beauty concealing structural rot. In the office, I eased into my chair while Elaine turned on the small desk lamp, casting the room. In a warm, localized glow that wouldn't disturb Maggie, still sleeping in the guest room down the hall. "What exactly are we looking for?" Elaine whispered, eyeing the expansive bookshelves and filing cabinets dubiously. Not what, I corrected. Who? I need to understand exactly what Grant and Veronica were after. I opened my laptop, grateful that I'd insisted on maintaining a separate, personal device from my Harmon tech equipment. Grant had mocked this too, calling it redundant and inefficient, not understanding that I needed this small realm that remained solely mine. "Can you get me the external drive from the safe?" I asked Elaine. "Behind the Matisse print." She looked surprised. "You have a hidden safe?" "One of many things my husband doesn't know about me," I replied, typing in my password. The wall safe yielded a small external hard drive, unmarked, unremarkable, and containing the complete digital history of Mills Integration Systems. While most tech executives prided themselves on cloud storage and cutting-edge security systems, I had maintained this physical backup, updated monthly and disconnected from any network that could be compromised. Old-fashioned, Grant had called my security paranoia. Prescient, it turned out. I connected the drive and navigated to the original Westlake Systems contract, the document Grant was desperately searching for, the linchpin of his $120 million merger. The agreement looked innocuous enough. Standard. Integration services, maintenance protocols, permitted uses. But Section 17, Paragraph C contained the provision that now placed extraordinary power in my hands. Mills Integration Systems shall remain the exclusive provider of integration services for Westlake Systems' core infrastructure architecture in perpetuity, unless both parties agree in writing to terminate this exclusive relationship. This provision shall survive any merger, acquisition, or restructuring of either party. Harold Westlake insisted on this clause, I explained to Elaine, who had pulled up a chair beside me. He'd been burned by a previous acquisition where his new parent company forced him to switch vendors. He said he'd never again let corporate politics override technical excellence. And Grant has no idea this exists. He knew there was some kind of exclusivity agreement, I said, scrolling through the document, but he dismissed it as standard boilerplate that would automatically transfer when our companies merged. He never bothered to read the actual language. "Because you were just his wife," Elaine observed bitterly. "Not a real business partner." "Exactly," I agreed, feeling the familiar sting of that dismissal. A pain separate from and yet intertwined with my physical agony. Now I need to understand exactly what Veronica knew. She's not just the mistress, she's playing a longer game here. I turned to my computer and began a deep dive into Harmon Tech's secure systems, accessing servers and databases using administrator credentials Grant didn't know I possessed. For the next 2 hours, I methodically traced communications, reviewed meeting minutes, and analyzed document access patterns. "This doesn't make sense," I murmured as the sky outside began to lighten with dawn. "According to these logs, Veronica has been accessing Westlake merger files for nearly 9 months, before she even started working at Harmon Tech." Elaine frowned. "How is that possible?" "Remote access," I replied, following the digital breadcrumbs. "Using Grant's credentials." The implications were staggering. Grant hadn't simply hired his mistress as his executive assistant after beginning their affair. Their relationship predated her employment, and she had been accessing sensitive corporate information from the very beginning. "This goes beyond an office romance," I said, leaning back carefully to avoid jarring my spine. "Veronica was placed at Harmon Tech deliberately." "By whom?" Elaine asked, bewildered. "That's what I need to find out," I replied, reaching for my phone. And I know exactly who to ask. I dialed a number I hadn't used in years, wondering if it still worked, if the connection still existed. "Katherine Mills," answered a gruff voice on the third ring. "It's been a long time." "Hello, Harold," I replied, a genuine smile forming, despite everything. "I hear Bora Bora is treating you well." Harold Westlake had retired officially 5 years ago, turning daily operations of Westlake systems over to his son James. But I knew from industry gossip that he maintained a controlling interest and final say in major decisions, particularly those involving his legacy. "Not as well as treachery seems to be treating your husband," he replied bluntly. "I've been following the merger preparations with great interest." "Then you know why I'm calling." "The exclusivity provision," he confirmed. "James stumbled across it during due diligence last week. Caused quite the uproar with his legal team." "Did it also cause an uproar with Veronica Blake?" I asked, cutting to the heart of my suspicion. The momentary silence on the line confirmed I'd hit a nerve. "You've been doing your homework," Harold said finally, "though not as thoroughly as you should have." "Enlighten me." "Veronica Blake isn't just James's ex-girlfriend from college," Harold explained. "She's his cousin by marriage. Her aunt married my younger brother 20 years ago. She's been working for Westlake Systems in various capacities since she graduated." The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. "She infiltrated Harmony. Tech!" "Infiltrated is a harsh word," Harold countered, though I could hear a hint of amusement in his voice. "Let's call it strategic placement." James was concerned about Grant's reputation for aggressive acquisitions that gutted the companies he purchased. He wanted eyes inside Harmon Tech before committing to any merger discussions. And Grant made it absurdly easy by thinking with the wrong organ, I concluded, anger building. "But that doesn't explain why she moved into my home while I was in surgery." "That part wasn't our idea," Harold admitted, his tone softening slightly. "Veronica was supposed to gather information about Grant's merger intentions, not become personally involved. The relationship evolved beyond our expectations. Or she saw a better opportunity," I suggested. "A chance to position herself advantageously, regardless of how the merger played out." "That sounds like Veronica," Harold agreed. "She's always been ambitious. Perhaps too ambitious in this case." I digested this information, recalibrating my understanding of the players involved. Grant wasn't just a philandering husband. He was a business leader who had been comprehensively outmaneuvered, compromised by his own arrogance and appetites. And Veronica wasn't merely a homewrecker. She was a corporate spy who had expanded her mission to include personal gain. "What do you want, Katherine?" Harold asked after a moment of silence. "Clearly, you didn't call just to confirm Veronica's connections." "I want to know where you stand on this merger," I replied. "The real answer, not the corporate line." "Off the record?" "Completely," he sighed, the sound of a man weighing loyalty against pragmatism. "I don't trust Grant Harmon with my company's legacy. James is convinced we need Harmon Tech's market reach and capital resources. But I've seen too many founders regret selling to predators like Grant." "And if there were an alternative?" "I'm listening." I outlined my proposal, a restructured merger that would protect Westlake's core operations while still achieving the market synergies James desired. A merger that would place Mills Integration Systems at the center of the combined entity's technical architecture, ensuring continuity for Westlake's clients while leveraging Harmon Tech's sales infrastructure. "Ambitious," Harold commented when I finished. "Grant would never agree to cede that much control." "Grant isn't the only decision-maker in this scenario," I reminded him. "Without my signature on behalf of Mills Integration, the merger can't proceed under any terms." "You'd block your husband's crowning achievement?" Harold asked, though his tone suggested he already knew my answer. "I'd ensure that achievement is built on mutual respect rather than exploitation," I corrected. "And yes, I'm prepared to block it entirely if necessary." "I'll speak with James," Harold promised. "In the meantime, be careful, Katherine. Grant won't take this challenge to his authority lightly." After hanging up, I turned to find Elaine watching me with a mixture of awe and concern. "When did you become Machiavelli?" she asked. "When my husband moved his corporate spy mistress into our home while I was having emergency surgery," I replied, the exhaustion of the early morning research and revelation finally catching up with me. Help me back to bed? I need to rest before the next battle. Grant arrived at 10 a.m., striding into the house as if nothing had changed, as if he hadn't betrayed both our marriage and his company's security. He carried a bouquet of white lilies, still my least favorite flower, still a gesture meant more for appearance than genuine care. He found me in the kitchen, where Maggie was helping me manage a light breakfast while seated at the island that overlooked the lake. My walker stood nearby, a visible reminder of my physical vulnerability. "You look better," he observed, setting the flowers on the counter. "How's the pain?" "Manageable," I replied neutrally. "The same cannot be said for the merger complications." His expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "Yes, well, that's why I'm here. We need to talk about the Mills integration documentation." Maggie took her cue to leave, squeezing my shoulder supportively as she passed. "I'll be in the office, if you need anything." Once we were alone, Grant pulled up a stool opposite me, his posture conveying the confident authority he wielded in boardrooms and executive suites. "I've reviewed the prenup amendments Lawrence delivered," he began. "They're unnecessary and frankly offensive." "Offensive," I repeated calmly. "Like finding another woman's lingerie in my bathroom cabinet?" He waved away the accusation with an impatient gesture. "I've asked Veronica to find other accommodations. That situation is resolved." "No, Grant," I corrected him, my voice steady, despite the anger bubbling beneath. "The situation is exposed. There's a difference." He sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose in the gesture he used when dealing with particularly difficult subordinates. "Katherine, I understand you're upset, and perhaps I handled things poorly, but we have larger issues at stake right now. The Westlake merger is at risk because you gave access to sensitive corporate information to a woman working for our acquisition target," I finished for him. "A woman whose connection to James Westlake you somehow failed to investigate before. Hiring her—" Grant's face drained of color. "What are you talking about?" "Veronica Blake," I said, watching his expression carefully. "Cousin by marriage to James Westlake, longtime employee of Westlake Systems, and apparently your mistress for at least 9 months, well before you hired her as your executive assistant." "That's absurd," he sputtered, though the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes betrayed him. "Veronica was thoroughly vetted by HR before you overrode the standard hiring process to bring her on as your assistant," I interrupted. "Yes, I checked those records too. You personally expedited her employment, bypassing 2 levels of approval that might have flagged her connection to Westlake." Grant stood abruptly, pacing the kitchen with agitated energy. "Even if there is some distant connection, which I find highly unlikely, it doesn't change our current situation. We need the Mills integration documentation to satisfy the Westlake legal team's due diligence requirements." "You mean you need my signature on the exclusivity waiver?" I corrected. "The document that would allow Westlake to terminate their perpetual integration services agreement with Mills Integration Systems." He froze mid-stride, turning slowly to face me. "How do you know about that?" "Because unlike you, I actually read the contracts I sign," I replied, allowing myself a small, satisfied smile. Section 17, Paragraph C of the original Westlake agreement. "The provision that makes my signature, not just useful but essential to your precious merger." Grant's expression cycled rapidly through shock, calculation, and finally a forced conciliation. He returned to his seat, leaning forward with the intensity he reserved for high-stakes negotiations. "Katherine, this is our company," he said, emphasizing the "our" with practiced sincerity. "Everything I've built, everything we've built together, depends on this merger succeeding. Whatever personal issues we're facing, surely we can set them aside for the greater good of Harmon Tech." The appeal might have worked once, might have swayed the compliant, accommodating Katherine, who had gradually sublimated her own ambitions, to support his. But that Katherine had died on the operating table, replaced by a woman who saw with painful clarity the imbalance that had defined our relationship for 18 years. Our company, I repeated thoughtfully. Interesting how it becomes our company only when you need something from me. Otherwise, it's your achievements, your vision, your success story. That's not fair, he protested. You chose to step back from an operational role. You said you wanted more work-life balance. I said I wanted children, I corrected quietly. You said they would interfere with your career trajectory. So I compromised, as I always did. I stepped back, supported your ambitions, became the corporate wife you needed for your executive image while my own professional identity withered. Grant had the grace to look momentarily abashed, though whether from genuine remorse or tactical retreat I couldn't tell. We can discuss all of this, he said, modulating his tone to sound reasonable and open. After the merger closes, right now, we have a critical deadline approaching. Yes, we do, I agreed. Which is why I've prepared an alternative merger structure that better protects all parties' interests. I slid a folder across the counter, one I'd had Lawrence prepare overnight based on my conversation with Harold Westlake. Grant opened it with visible reluctance, his expression darkening as he scanned the contents. This is completely unacceptable, he snapped, closing the folder with enough force to make my water glass jump. You're proposing to resurrect Mills. Integration as an independent entity within the merged company, with you as its CEO reporting directly to the board rather than to me. I'm proposing to acknowledge reality, I countered. Mills Integration's exclusivity agreement with Westlake is the cornerstone of this merger's technical integration strategy. That agreement remains valid only if Mills Integration maintains operational independence, per Section 17, Paragraph C. This would undermine the entire consolidated leadership structure we've planned, Grant argued, his voice rising. It would create unnecessary complexity and potential conflicts of interest. It would ensure that technical decisions aren't sacrificed to political expediency, I replied evenly. And it would give me a seat at the table I've earned through my original relationship with Westlake Systems. Grant studied me with new wariness, as if seeing me clearly for the first time in years. You've discussed this with Harold Westlake already, haven't you? I have. Behind my back. Like you discussed our merger strategy with your mistress behind mine? I asked sweetly. At least my conversations didn't take place in our marital bed. He flushed with anger, then visibly struggled to regain his composure. This is emotional blackmail, Katherine. Using a personal situation to extort professional concessions. No, Grant, I said, my voice hardening. This is consequences. You gave our company's confidential information to a Westlake operative because you couldn't keep your pants zipped. You violated our marriage by moving your mistress into our home while I was in surgery. And now you're experiencing the natural results of those choices. He stood again, running a hand through his perfect silver-streaked hair in frustration. The board won't accept these terms. James Westlake won't accept these terms. Then the merger will fail, I replied simply. And when it does, I'll be forced to disclose to our shareholders exactly why, including Veronica's connection to Westlake and your failure to identify that conflict of interest before hiring her. The threat hung between us. Its implications, clear. Grant's reputation would be destroyed, his leadership questioned, his judgment impugned. The board might even force him out, particularly if the collapsed merger damaged Harmon Tech's stock price significantly. You wouldn't, he said, but uncertainty had replaced confidence in his voice. I wouldn't have thought you'd move your mistress into our home while I was having emergency spinal surgery, I countered. Yet here we are, discovering new depths in each other. He paced the kitchen again, mind clearly racing through scenarios, calculating angles, searching for leverage. Finally, he turned back to me, his expression a mask of professional detachment. I'll review your proposal with our legal team, he said stiffly. But I make no promises. The merger timeline is too tight for significant structural revisions. Then, I suggest you work quickly, I replied. My cooperation has an expiration date. After he left, I remained at the kitchen island, watching sunlight dance across the surface of Lake Washington through the wall of windows. The confrontation had exhausted me, pain throbbing along my spine despite the medication, but a different sensation coursed alongside it, the unfamiliar but exhilarating feeling of reclaiming my power after years of gradual surrender. Maggie joined me, sliding onto the stool Grant had vacated. How did it go? About as expected, I replied. He's furious, desperate, and calculating his next move. And are you ready for that next move? I thought of the additional information I'd uncovered during my early morning research. Details about Veronica's access to Harmon tech systems that even Grant didn't know. Financial projections that had been altered before presentation to the YI board, communication with Westlake executives that bypassed normal channels. I'm not just ready, I told her, a cold determination settling over me. I'm ahead of him. For the first time since waking up in the hospital to discover my husband's betrayal, I felt not just anger or pain, but something far more potent, anticipation. The physical therapist arrived promptly at 2 that afternoon, a no-nonsense woman named Diane with biceps that suggested she could carry me around the house if necessary. She seemed unimpressed by the lakefront mansion, the designer furniture, or the drama currently unfolding within these walls. The goal today is to establish a baseline, she explained, helping me from the hospital bed to the mat she'd laid out in the center of the bedroom. We need to understand exactly where you are in your recovery before we can build a proper rehabilitation program. For the next hour, she guided me through a series of excruciating movements, each designed to test some aspect of my post-surgical mobility. Every time I gasped in pain or failed to complete a movement, she made notes in her tablet without comment or judgment. How long? I asked finally, as she helped me back to the edge of the bed. How long until I can function normally? Diane considered me with clinical detachment. Define normally. Walking without assistance, sitting for extended periods, traveling. 3 to 6 months for full recovery, she replied bluntly. But you'll see significant improvements within 6 to 8 weeks if you adhere strictly to the program I'm designing. I don't have 6 to 8 weeks, I said, thinking of the merger timeline, of Grant's likely countermoves, of the corporate chess game that wouldn't wait for my body to heal. Your spine doesn't care about your schedule, Mrs. Harmon, Diane responded, packing her equipment with brisk efficiency. It will heal at its own pace. Push too hard, and you risk permanent damage. After she left, Elaine brought me a cup of tea and the pill organizer containing my next round of medication. She seemed intense, she observed, having watched part of the therapy session from the doorway. She seemed honest, I corrected, swallowing the pills with a grimace. And right now, honesty is in short supply around here. My phone chimed with an incoming message. Lawrence, confirming our conference call scheduled for 3 o'clock. I glanced at the time. 45 minutes to rest before the next battle. Help me to the office? I asked Elaine. I need to prepare for the call. Can't? You take it from bed? She protested, eyeing me with concern. You look exhausted. I need to be at my desk, I insisted. Grant has spent years dismissing me because I operated from the margins. If I want to be taken seriously now, I need to project authority. The home office had been transformed overnight into a command center. Maggie had set up multiple monitors displaying financial projections, merger documentation, and communication logs. A secure conference line had been established, and files were arranged in precise stacks across the desk surface. I've compiled everything we have on the altered financial projections, Maggie reported as I settled carefully into my chair. The discrepancies are subtle but significant, enough to potentially constitute securities fraud if they were included in official merger disclosures. And Veronica's system access? Comprehensive and unauthorized, she confirmed. She used Grant's credentials to access servers and databases far beyond her job role, including financial reporting systems, board presentations, and executive communications. Which makes Grant either complicit or criminally negligent, I observed, arranging the documents I would need for the call. Either way, it's leverage. At precisely 3 o'clock, my computer chimed with an incoming video call. Lawrence Patel appeared on screen, his usual impeccable suit complemented by the understated elegance of his law firm's conference room. "Katherine," he greeted me, his expression as unreadable as ever. "How are you feeling?" "Like I had major spinal surgery a week ago," I replied dryly. "But functional. Is James Westlake joining us?" "He should be connecting momentarily," Lawrence confirmed. "His father has briefed him on your proposal, but he's approaching this call with considerable skepticism." "Understandable," I acknowledged. From his perspective, I'm an unexpected complication in an already complex transaction. "An unexpected complication with considerable leverage," Lawrence amended, a rare hint of approval in his tone. The screen split as another participant joined the call, James Westlake, looking younger than his 38 years in a casual button-down shirt rather than the expected executive suit. His resemblance to his father was striking. The same piercing blue eyes, the same analytical gaze, though his features lacked the weathered gravity that decades of business battles had etched into Harold's face. "Mrs. Harmon," he began, his tone professionally cordial but distant. "I appreciate you making time for this discussion despite your recovery. My father speaks highly of your technical acumen." "Mr. Westlake," I replied with equal formality. "Thank you for accommodating this conversation on short notice. I understand you have concerns about the revised merger structure I've proposed." He leaned forward slightly, his expression hardening. "Concerns is an understatement. Your proposal fundamentally alters the integration plan we've spent months developing with Harmon Tech's leadership team." "You mean with my husband and his executive assistant?" I corrected gently. "The same executive assistant who previously worked for Westlake, systems and maintains a family connection to your organization, facts that were concealed during merger negotiations." James's expression flickered momentarily before settling into careful neutrality. "Veronica Blake's previous employment and family connections are irrelevant to the merger's technical and financial merits. They're highly relevant to the ethical and legal framework of the negotiations," Lawrence interjected smoothly, "particularly given her inappropriate access to Harmon Tech's confidential information while maintaining those connections." "I'm not here to discuss personnel matters," James replied stiffly. "I'm here to understand why you're proposing to resurrect Mills Integration Systems as an independent entity within the merged company when those assets were integrated into Harmon Tech years ago." "Because those assets were never fully integrated," I explained, pulling up the original Westlake contract on my screen and sharing it with the call participants. "As you can see in Section 17, Paragraph C, the exclusive relationship between Mills Integration and Westlake Systems survived any merger or acquisition. Since Harmon Tech never properly dissolved Mills Integration after our business combination, that exclusivity provision remains in effect." James studied the contract, frustration evident in the tight line of his jaw. "This is a technical legal detail that could be resolved with appropriate documentation. It doesn't justify restructuring the entire merger." "On the contrary," Lawrence countered. "This technical legal detail is the foundation of Westlake's entire integration architecture. Any attempt to transfer these rights without maintaining Mills Integration's operational independence would violate the explicit terms of the agreement and potentially destabilize your core systems." "My father explained your position," James said, addressing me directly again. "What he didn't explain is why you're raising these issues now, days before the merger announcement, rather than months ago when the process began." I met his gaze steadily through the camera. "Because until recently, I trusted my husband to represent our combined interests ethically and transparently. Recent events have shattered that trust, both personally and professionally. So this is about your marital problems, James concluded dismissively. You're using a corporate transaction to extract revenge for personal grievances. No, Mr. Westlake, I corrected, my voice hardening. This is about ensuring that a $120 million merger is built on honest foundations rather than deception and conflicts of interest. Your due diligence team identified the Mills integration issue because it represents a genuine legal and operational concern, not because I manufactured it for leverage. I pulled up another document, the altered financial projections Maggie had identified. More concerning should be these discrepancies in the financial information presented to your team versus what was shown to Harmon Tech's board. James leaned closer to his screen, eyes narrowing as he examined the numbers. Where did you get these? From Harmon Tech's secure servers, I replied. The same servers Veronica Blake accessed using my husband's credentials, altering projections to make the merger appear more favorable to both sides than honest accounting would support. Lawrence's eyebrows rose fractionally. This was new information I hadn't shared with him yet. If these alterations were included in official merger documentation, they could constitute securities fraud, he observed. Precisely, I agreed. Which means both companies face significant legal exposure unless we address these issues before the merger proceeds. James sat back, running a hand through his hair in a gesture reminiscent of his father. What exactly are you proposing, Mrs. Harmon? 3 things, I replied, keeping my voice steady despite the increasing pain in my back from sitting upright for so long. First, a restructured merger that maintains Mills integration as an operationally independent subsidiary with me as CEO, reporting directly to the board. Second, a complete audit of all financial projections and merger documentation to identify and correct any misrepresentations. And third, a separation agreement that protects my ownership interests regardless of my marital status. And if we decline these terms? James asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Then I withhold my signature on the Mills integration exclusivity waiver, I stated simply. Without it, your legal team has already determined. The merger cannot proceed as structured. James was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Finally, he sighed. I need to discuss this with my executive team and legal counsel. This isn't a decision I can make unilaterally. Of course, I acknowledged. But you should be aware that time is of the essence. My husband is undoubtedly developing his own strategy to circumvent my position. And what might that strategy be? James asked, curiosity overcoming his professional reserve. Most likely, he'll try to prove that Mills integration was fully absorbed into Harmon Tech, despite the lack of formal dissolution, I speculated. He'll argue that I acted as a Harmon Tech executive rather than maintaining Mills integration's separate identity, effectively abandoning any claim to independent authority. Would that argument have merit? James directed the question to Lawrence. Limited, my attorney replied confidently. We've maintained minimal but consistent documentation of Mills Integration's continued legal existence, including annual reports and tax filings. It exists as a shell company, but it exists nonetheless, and its contractual obligations and rights remain legally binding. I see, James said thoughtfully. And your second point about the financial discrepancies, you have documentation supporting these allegations? Comprehensive documentation, I confirmed, including access logs showing who made the alterations and when. I'll need to see those, he said, his tone shifting from skeptical to concerned. You'll have them within the hour, I promised, along with a more detailed version of my proposed restructuring. After the call ended, I leaned back carefully in my chair, exhaustion washing over me in a wave that threatened to pull me under completely. Maggie brought me a glass of water and another pain pill. You did well, she said, her expression impressed. James Westlake came in expecting to dismiss you as an emotional wife causing problems. He left recognizing you as a formidable executive protecting legitimate business interests. It won't be enough, I replied, swallowing the medication gratefully. Not by itself. James still reports to his board and Grant has allies there. He's undoubtedly working his connections now, trying to isolate me. Speaking of Grant, Elaine interjected from the doorway, he's just pulled into the driveway, and he's not alone. I glanced at the security monitor she indicated, watching as Grant emerged from his Tesla, accompanied by an older man I recognized. Immediately, Walter Chen, chairman of Harmon Tech's board of directors and one of Grant's oldest allies in the business world. No relation to Maggie, despite the shared surname, Walter had been my husband's mentor early in his career and had championed every major initiative Grant had proposed over the past decade. This should be interesting, I murmured, straightening, in my chair despite the pain. Maggie, send the financial documentation to James Westlake now, before they try to prevent it. Elaine, show them in when they ring the bell. Grant didn't bother ringing. He used his key, striding into the house with the entitled confidence of a man on his home territory, Walter following a step behind. They found me in the office, seated behind my desk with Maggie standing supportively at my side. Katherine, Grant began without preamble. This has gone far enough. You're jeopardizing a transaction critical to Harmon Tech's future based on emotional reactions to a personal situation. Hello, Grant, I replied calmly. Walter, what a surprise to see. You here? I don't recall scheduling a board meeting in my home office during my medical leave. Walter Chen had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. At 72, he possessed the gravitas of a long and successful career in technology, his silver. Hair and impeccable suit projecting authority and old-school corporate power. Katherine, he acknowledged with a nod. I apologize for the intrusion during your recovery. However, given the urgency of the situation, I felt a personal conversation was warranted. A personal conversation? I repeated, my tone making it clear I recognized the euphemism for what it was, an attempt to pressure me through Grant's most powerful ally. How thoughtful. Grant remained standing while Walter took one of the visitor chairs opposite my desk. I've reviewed your proposal for the restructured merger, Walter said, getting directly to the point. While I appreciate your desire for a more defined role in the combined entity, the timing and nature of these demands are problematic. They're not demands, Walter, I corrected. They're requirements based on legal realities that Grant either overlooked or deliberately concealed. During merger planning, legal technicalities, Grant interjected dismissively, the kind any competent corporate attorney could resolve without dramatic structural changes. Is that what you told the board? I asked, looking directly at Walter. That my concerns were mere technicalities? Did you also tell them about the altered financial projections Veronica Blake created using Grant's system credentials? Walter's expression remained impassive, but his eyes sharpened. What alterations? The ones I just sent to James Westlake, I replied, nodding toward Maggie, who confirmed with a slight nod that the documents had been transmitted. Projections that overstate merger synergies by approximately 22% while understating integration costs by nearly 30%. Grant's face flushed with anger. That's absurd. Our financial team vetted all projections thoroughly. No, Grant, I countered. They vetted the projections you showed them, not the ones you and Veronica modified before presenting to the Westlake team. Walter turned to Grant, his expression now openly concerned. Is there any truth to this allegation? Of course not, Grant snapped. Katherine is desperately throwing around accusations to strengthen her negotiating position. She has no evidence of any financial impropriety. Actually, Maggie interjected, turning one of the monitors toward Walter. We have complete server logs showing exactly when the projections were altered, using Grant's credentials from an IP address matching Veronica Blake's home internet service. Walter studied the screen, his frown deepening. This is concerning, Grant. Very concerning. It's a misunderstanding, Grant insisted, though his confident demeanor had begun to crack. Veronica may have accessed the files while working remotely, but any changes would have been at my direction and within standard modeling parameters. The SEC tends to take a dim view of standard modeling parameters that coincidentally make a merger appear 22% more valuable than honest accounting supports, I observed mildly, particularly when those alterations are concealed from one company's board while being presented to the other's executive team. Walter stood suddenly, straightening his suit jacket with a decisive gesture. I think we need to continue this discussion at the office, Grant, with our general counsel present. Walter, you can't possibly be taking these accusations seriously, Grant protested. Katherine is clearly acting out of emotional distress and misplaced anger over personal matters. The dismissive characterization, so typical of how Grant had explained away my concerns throughout our marriage, ignited a fresh surge of anger that temporarily overpowered my physical pain. My emotional state has nothing to do with server logs, Grant, I said, my voice cutting through his protestations. Nor does it change the legal reality that Mills Integration's signature is required for this merger to proceed. You can attribute my actions to hysteria, revenge, or feminine irrationality if it soothes your ego, but the facts remain unchanged. And those facts are now in James Westlake's hands as well as Walter's. Walter turned to me, his expression grave. Katherine, regardless of how we proceed with these allegations, the merger timeline remains critical. Harmon Tech has financial commitments contingent on this transaction closing as scheduled. I'm aware, I replied, which is why my proposal offers a path forward that addresses the legal requirements while still allowing the merger to proceed on the original timeline. The alternative isn't a delay, Walter. It's collapse. If I withhold my signature on the Mills integration waiver, this merger cannot happen in any form. Walter nodded slowly, understanding the leverage I held. I'll review your proposal with the full board this evening. In the meantime, I suggest we all refrain from further unilateral actions that might complicate an already delicate situation. As Walter headed for the door, Grant lingered, his expression dark with barely contained fury. This isn't over, Katherine. No, I agreed quietly. It's just beginning. After they left, Maggie helped me from the desk chair to the more comfortable armchair by the window. The confrontation had drained what little energy I'd recovered since the morning, and my surgical site throbbed with a vengeance that even prescription medication couldn't fully address. Walter Chen seemed genuinely surprised by the financial discrepancies, Maggie observed, bringing me a fresh ice pack for my back, which suggests Grant hasn't been fully transparent with the board. Grant has always operated on a need-to-know basis with the board, I replied, closing my eyes as the cold seeped into my aching muscles. He tells them what supports his agenda and conceals what doesn't. It's worked for years because he's delivered consistent results. Until now, Elaine added from the doorway. Walter didn't look happy when they left. He isn't, I confirmed. Walter built his reputation on integrity. Financial manipulation crosses a line he won't tolerate, even from his protégé. As the afternoon light slanted through the windows, casting long shadows across the office, I felt the weight of the battle still to come. My body demanded rest, but my mind raced with potential scenarios, counter-moves, vulnerabilities to address. We need to prepare for Grant's next move, I said, forcing my eyes open despite the exhaustion pulling at me. He won't surrender control, without deploying every weapon in his arsenal. What do you think he'll try? Elaine asked. I considered the question, thinking about the man I'd been married to for 18 years, his strengths, his weaknesses, his patterns in crisis. He'll try to isolate me, I said finally, cut off my support system, undermine my credibility, question my mental stability, and when that fails, he'll offer a compromise that appears reasonable on the surface while maintaining his fundamental control. And when that fails? Maggie pressed. I smiled grimly, remembering countless corporate battles I'd witnessed from the sidelines. Always the supportive wife, rather than the strategic participant. Then he'll do what Grant always does when truly cornered, I replied. He'll find someone to sacrifice. Sleep came in fitful bursts that night, interrupted by pain that medication could dull but not eliminate, and by dreams where I was forever trapped in hospital beds while faceless figures made decisions about my life without consulting me. I woke at 4:17 a.m. according to the glowing bedside clock, with a clarity that belied the early hour. Grant would make his move today. I could feel it with the same certainty I'd once sensed approaching thunderstorms in my childhood, before meteorological apps and radar predictions, a heaviness in the air, a pressure building toward inevitable release. Since sleep had abandoned me, I reached for my tablet on the nightstand, careful not to twist my spine in the movement. The secure messaging app showed several overnight communications from Lawrence, sent after I'd taken a stronger pain medication and surrendered to exhaustion. Board meeting concluded at 11:45 p.m. Walter Chen requested complete audit of merger, financials. Grant argued strenuously against delay, but was overruled. James Westlake called me directly after receiving your documentation. Westlake legal team working through the night to verify implications. Grant attempted to contact Judge Wilson, his golf partner, after the board meeting. Purpose unknown, but concerning given Wilson's jurisdiction over corporate matters. This last message sent a chill through me, despite the warmth of my bedroom. Judge Thomas Wilson had presided over numerous corporate disputes in Seattle's business community, and his friendship with Grant was well established. If Grant was reaching out to him at midnight after a contentious board meeting, he was likely exploring legal maneuvers to neutralize my position. I texted Lawrence back. Could Grant petition for emergency conservatorship? Claim my medical condition impairs my judgment? His response came minutes later, despite the hour. Possible but difficult to obtain without substantial medical evidence. Have documented your cognitive clarity with both physicians. Precautionary. Measures in place. The fact that Lawrence had already anticipated and countered this potential move should have been reassuring. Instead, it underscored the ruthlessness of the battle I was fighting. My husband might actually attempt to have me declared incompetent to prevent me from blocking his merger. I set the tablet aside and stared at the ceiling, mentally cataloging the resources at my disposal versus those Grant controlled. On paper, the comparison was laughably uneven. He commanded $1 billion company with hundreds of employees, maintained close relationships with board members and industry leaders, and had built a reputation as one of Seattle's most formidable business executives. I had a legal technicality, 2 loyal friends, a capable attorney, and a body so damaged that walking to the bathroom required assistance. And yet, that legal technicality was the linchpin upon which a $120 million merger depended. Those loyal friends possessed invaluable institutional knowledge and technical expertise. That capable attorney had outmaneuvered corporate giants throughout his distinguished career. And this damaged body housed a mind that had built Mills integration, systems from nothing, a mind now fully awakened from its 18-year slumber as Mrs. Grant Harmon. By the time dawn broke, I had formulated a plan, one that anticipated Grant's likely moves and prepared countermeasures for each. When Elaine checked on me at 6:30 a.m., I was already sitting up in bed, making notes on my tablet. "You're supposed to be resting," she chided, setting a cup of tea on the nightstand. "I'll rest when Grant stops trying to outmaneuver me," I replied, accepting the tea gratefully. "Has Maggie left for the office yet?" During last night's strategy session, we had decided Maggie should go to Harmon Tech headquarters today, leveraging her past executive role and current consulting relationship to gather intelligence from inside the building. Her presence would be unremarkable given the merger activity, but invaluable as our eyes and ears within Grant's domain. "She's just having breakfast," Elaine confirmed. "Her temporary badge from last month's consulting gig still works. IT never deactivates credentials promptly. Tell her to focus on the 15th floor today," I instructed, recalling the executive level layout. Grant will be working from his private conference room rather than his main office. He always does during crisis management. And he'll want Veronica nearby despite the optics. As predicted, Grant made his first move at precisely 8:30 a.m., early enough to appear proactive to the board, but late enough that most executives would already be at their desks, unable to intervene immediately in whatever strategy he was deploying. The house phone rang, its antiquated trill startling in the quiet morning. Few people use that number anymore, which made the caller's identity obvious even before Elaine answered in the kitchen and then appeared in my doorway, expression concerned. "It's Dr. Phillips," she said, referring to the psychiatrist who had consulted briefly on my pain management protocol in the hospital. "He says he's been asked to conduct an emergency psychological evaluation as part of your disability claim." "I haven't filed a disability claim," I replied, the trap immediately apparent. "Put him on speaker." Dr. Phillips' voice filled the bedroom, professionally modulated and carefully neutral. "Mrs. Harmon, I apologize for the early call. Your husband's office contacted me about conducting an evaluation to support your short-term disability benefits during recovery. I understand you're experiencing some pain management issues that may be affecting your decision-making." "That's fascinating, Dr. Phillips," I replied pleasantly. "Considering I haven't applied for disability benefits, haven't reported decision-making impairment, and haven't authorized my husband to arrange medical appointments on my behalf since my discharge." A brief silence followed before the doctor continued, his tone noticeably cooler. "I see. There seems to be some confusion. I was told this was urgent and at your request. The only urgent matter is my husband's attempt to establish a psychiatric pretext for questioning my competence," I said bluntly. "I suggest you consider the ethical implications of participating in such an effort, particularly when it involves a merger worth $120 million that requires my signature to proceed. Mrs. Harmon, I assure you I had no knowledge of any financial transactions or—" "Save it," I interrupted. "My attorney will be contacting the medical board this morning to file a formal complaint regarding this transparent attempt to manipulate my medical care for corporate advantage. Good day, doctor." After Elaine disconnected the call, she stared at me with wide eyes. "He was actually trying to have you declared incompetent? Your own husband?" "He was establishing groundwork," I clarified. "Building a paper trail of alleged psychological concerns that could later support a conservatorship petition, or at minimum cast doubt on my decision-making capacity regarding the merger." "That's monstrous," Elaine said, sinking into the chair beside my bed. "That's Grant when—" "He's cornered," I corrected. "And it means our strategy is working. He wouldn't resort to such desperate measures if conventional options remained viable." My phone chimed with a text from Maggie. "In position on 15th floor. G and V both in private conference room with legal team. Atmosphere tense." I had barely finished reading her message when Lawrence called, his normally unflappable tone tinged with urgency. "Katherine, Grant has just filed an emergency petition with the court seeking temporary control of all marital assets, including your voting rights and Mills integration systems. He's claiming your medical condition has rendered you temporarily incapable of making sound business decisions." Despite having anticipated this move, the reality of it, the sheer audacity and betrayal it represented, stole my breath momentarily. "On what grounds?" "A letter from Dr. Andrews, your neurosurgeon, noting that you're on significant pain medication that can impair judgment, and a supporting statement from Dr. Phillips suggesting you've exhibited emotional instability since—" "The surgery? Dr. Phillips, who just called here pretending to conduct a disability evaluation?" I asked incredulously. "The same doctor who spoke to me for approximately 3 minutes before I called out the deception?" "The very same," Lawrence confirmed grimly. "Grant works fast. The petition was filed electronically at 8:15 this morning, and he's requested an emergency hearing this afternoon with Judge Wilson." "His golf buddy," I noted. "How convenient." Indeed. However, I've already filed our counter-response, including sworn statements from your primary care physician and the hospital psychiatrist, who actually evaluated you extensively, both confirming your complete cognitive capacity. I've also moved for Judge Wilson to recuse himself due to personal relationship with the petitioner. Will that work? It will certainly delay things, Lawrence replied. And delay works in our favor right now. Every hour that passes with the merger in limbo increases pressure on Grant from both the board and the Westlake team. What's our next move? I asked, already reaching for my tablet to message Maggie with this development. We accelerate, Lawrence said decisively. I've arranged a video conference with the full Harmon Tech board at noon. You need to make your case directly to them, bypass Grant entirely, and offer them a clear path forward that protects the merger, while addressing the Mills integration issue legitimately. The prospect of facing the 12-member board, most of whom I knew only as dinner party acquaintances rather than business associates, sent a wave of anxiety through me that had nothing to do with my physical condition. For years, I had allowed Grant to position me as the corporate wife, the supportive partner who attended functions but remained largely separate from business operations. Now I would need to assert myself as a savvy technology executive in my own right, while managing debilitating pain and countering my husband's attempts to discredit me. I'll be ready, I promised, more confidently than I felt. After disconnecting, I messaged Maggie with the update and a specific request. Need eyes on CFO immediately. Check who authorized the financial projections we flagged. Her reply came minutes later. On it. Rebecca, CFO's assistant, says G bypassed normal approval channels, used executive authority to expedite. This confirmation represented another piece of ammunition for the board meeting. If Grant had circumvented standard financial controls to push through misleading projections, the board's fiduciary responsibility would demand intervention, regardless of their personal loyalty to him. With Elaine's help, I managed a careful shower and changed into a silk blouse and tailored jacket that would convey professional authority on video, even paired with loose-fitting yoga pants that accommodated my still swollen lower back. A touch of makeup helped disguise the pallor that pain had etched into my features. By 11:30, I was settled at my desk in the home office, surrounded by documents Maggie had organized before leaving and fortified by the minimum dose of pain medication that would allow me to function clearly while seated upright for an extended period. At 11:45, my phone rang, an unknown number that I answered cautiously. Katherine? It's James Westlake. His voice carried a tension that hadn't been present during our previous call. James, this is unexpected. I'm calling as a professional courtesy, he said, the words clipped and precise. Grant has just presented our board with a proposal to restructure the merger in a way that supposedly eliminates the need for Mills Integration's separate signature. His legal team is arguing that your company exists in name only, and that all substantive assets and operational authority were transferred to Harmon Tech years ago. Though I had anticipated something like this, the timing was aggressive, clearly intended to present the Westlake board with a solution before my noons. Meeting with Harmon Tech's directors. And what does your legal team say about this novel interpretation? I asked, keeping my voice steady. They're divided, James admitted. Some see merit in Grant's argument given the years of practical integration between the companies. Others are concerned about potential legal exposure if we proceed without clear title to the exclusivity rights. Those concerns are well-founded, I observed, particularly given the altered financial projections your team is now examining. There was a pause before James spoke again, his voice lowered slightly. That's actually the main reason I'm calling. Our financial team completed their review of the documentation you provided. The discrepancies are significant enough that they're recommending we pause the entire merger process pending a complete audit. This was an unexpected development, one that potentially changed the dynamics of my upcoming board presentation. Has this recommendation been communicated to Harmon Tech officially? Not yet, James replied. Our CEO is meeting with Walter Chen in 30 minutes to deliver the message personally. I thought you should know in advance, given your complicated position in all this." "I appreciate the courtesy," I said sincerely. "And I want to be clear, I'm not opposed to the merger itself. I believe it makes strategic sense for both companies. What I oppose is the dishonesty in how it's been structured and the personal betrayal that accompanied it." "So I've gathered," James responded, a hint of dry humor finally breaking through his professional reserve. "For what it's worth, my father says he always knew you were the brains behind Mills Integration's architecture. He's not entirely displeased to see you reclaiming your proper role." After we disconnected, I immediately called Lawrence to update him on this significant development. The Westlake team's discovery of the financial discrepancies and their recommendation to pause the merger process would dramatically strengthen my position with the Harmon Tech Board. "This changes our approach," Lawrence agreed. "Rather than appearing as the obstacle to the merger, you now become the potential solution, the one person who can possibly keep the transaction on track despite the financial irregularities. Provided the board is willing to accept my structural proposals," I added, "which now look downright reasonable compared to a collapsed merger and potential SEC investigation," Lawrence noted with satisfaction. At precisely noon, my computer chimed with the incoming video conference. I straightened in my chair, ignoring the stab of pain the movement produced, and accepted the call. Walter Chen appeared first, his distinguished features arranged in an expression of grave concern. "Katherine, thank you for joining us during your recovery. The full board is assembled and eager to hear your perspective on recent developments." The screen expanded to show all 12 board members, seated around the massive conference table in Harmon Tech's executive boardroom. Grant was notably absent, a tactical decision by Walter that spoke volumes about the shifting power dynamics. "Thank you for accommodating this meeting," I began, my voice steadier than I had dared hope. "I recognize the timing is challenging, given the merger timeline, which is why I've prepared a comprehensive proposal that addresses the Mills integration contractual requirements while preserving the strategic benefits of the Westlake combination." For the next 20 minutes, I walked the board through my analysis of the situation, the legal reality of Mills Integration's continued existence, the exclusivity provision in the Westlake contract, and most critically, the altered financial projections that had been presented to both boards without proper verification. "To be clear," interrupted Bradley Townsend, a retired venture capitalist who had served on the board for over a decade, "you're stating that CEO Harmon knowingly presented modified financial projections that overstated merger benefits?" The server logs confirm that the files were altered using his credentials," I replied carefully. "Whether he directed those changes personally or allowed others to make them using his access, the result is the same. Both boards received misleading information regarding the merger's financial implications." Walter Chen leaned forward, his expression grave. "We've just been informed that Westlake Systems is considering pausing the entire merger process pending a complete financial audit. This represents a potential disaster for Harmon Tech, given our public commitments and market expectations." Several board members exchanged alarmed glances, the implications clear. A publicly announced delay would tank Harmon Tech's stock price, trigger investor panic, and potentially destroy the deal entirely. "There is an alternative," I offered into the tense silence. "One that satisfies Westlake's concerns while allowing the merger to proceed on schedule." All eyes returned to me as I outlined my proposal. The restructured merger that would resurrect Mills Integration as an independent subsidiary focused on maintaining the core integration architecture that made Westlake Systems so valuable. The same proposal Grant had dismissed as unacceptable yesterday. "This approach addresses the contractual requirements legitimately," I explained, "while providing Westlake the confidence that their technical infrastructure will remain stable. Post-merger? It also creates clear separation between the financial reporting structures, eliminating concerns about the previously altered projections affecting ongoing operations." "And what role do you envision for yourself in this restructured entity?" asked Clara Jenkins, the board's newest member and one of the few female executives in the room. "I would resume active management of Mills Integration Systems as CEO of the subsidiary," I replied honestly, "reporting directly to the board rather than to Grant to maintain appropriate corporate governance given our personal relationship." Or, "lack thereof," muttered another board member, not quite under his breath. Walter silenced him with a sharp look before addressing me again. "Katherine, while your proposal has merit from a structural perspective, we cannot ignore the timing and personal circumstances surrounding this situation. Grant has raised concerns about your medical condition affecting your judgment." "I'm sure he has," I acknowledged, refusing to rise to the bait. "Just as I'm sure my doctors have provided sworn statements confirming my complete cognitive capacity despite my physical recovery. What Grant fails to mention is his own compromised judgment, moving his mistress into our home while I was in surgery, giving her unauthorized access to confidential company information, and then filing false legal petitions when I refused to. Simply hand over control of Mills Integration." The bluntness of my statement caused visible discomfort among several board members, who shifted in their seats or studied their tablets with sudden interest. "The personal aspects of this situation are regrettable," Walter said diplomatically. "However, our responsibility is to Harmon Tech shareholders, who expect this merger to close as scheduled." "Which it can," I reminded him, "under the restructured terms I've proposed. I've already discussed this approach with James Westlake, who indicated it would likely satisfy their legal team's concerns about the exclusivity provision while allowing the financial audit to proceed in parallel with integration planning." This was stretching the truth slightly. James had acknowledged the approach might work, but hadn't explicitly endorsed it. However, the implied Westlake support shifted the board's attention from skepticism to careful consideration. "If we were to pursue this restructuring," Bradley Townsend asked, "what guarantees do we have that you won't make additional demands or further complicate the transaction?" "My signed agreement to the revised terms, with all conditions explicitly stated," I replied promptly. "I have no interest in prolonged conflict or corporate drama, Mr. Townsend. My goal is simple: to protect what I built while allowing this merger to succeed on honest terms." After a few more questions, Walter called for a brief board discussion, without me present. I was placed in a virtual waiting room, the sudden silence giving my pain medication a chance to catch up with the stress and physical demands of the presentation. 10 minutes later, the call reconnected. Walter's expression was unreadable as the board members settled back into view. "Katherine, the board has authorized me to pursue your proposed restructuring, subject to Westlake's formal agreement and complete resolution of all outstanding legal matters between you and Grant. We'll need final documentation by close of business tomorrow to maintain the merger timeline." Relief washed through me so powerfully I nearly swayed in my chair. "Thank you, Walter. I'll have Lawrence work with your legal team immediately on the documentation." As the call ended, my phone chimed with a message from Maggie. "Grant just escorted from building. Security involved." What happened? I stared at the message, understanding gradually dawning. The board hadn't just accepted my proposal, they had taken action against Grant. Walter's measured delivery had concealed what must have been a seismic decision. Before I could respond to Maggie, Lawrence called, his typically composed voice vibrating with urgency. "Katherine, Grant has been suspended pending investigation. The board voted 10-2 to place him on administrative leave effective immediately. Walter Chen has been named interim CEO." "That wasn't part of my proposal," I said, stunned by the swift and decisive action. "No, but it was the inevitable consequence once Westlake formally notified them about the financial discrepancies," Lawrence explained. "The board had no choice. Their fiduciary duty required immediate response once fraud allegations were credibly raised." As the implications sank in, I felt no triumph, no vindication, only a profound sadness for what had been lost. Grant had, sacrificed everything, his integrity, our marriage, his professional reputation, for a merger built on deception. And in the end, the board had done exactly what I'd predicted to Maggie yesterday. They had found someone to sacrifice. 6 months after that fateful board meeting, I stood at the podium during the official launch of the newly merged Harmon Westlake Technologies. My spine had healed enough that I only needed a discreet cane for support, and the titanium rods that held me together had become just another part of me, a reminder of strength found through unexpected breaking. The merger had proceeded under my restructured terms, with Mills Integration Systems operating as an independent subsidiary under my leadership. Grant had resigned rather than face a formal investigation, accepting a modest severance package in exchange for his silence. Last I heard, he'd moved to Arizona, without Veronica, who had quickly distanced herself once his power evaporated. As I looked out at the assembled employees, investors, and press, I saw not just a corporate success story, but a personal resurrection. The woman who had disappeared into the role of supportive wife had reclaimed her place as a technology executive in her own right, commanding respect not through marriage, but through competence. Sometimes life forces a reset, I told the audience. It breaks us down to rebuild us stronger. 6 months ago, I was in a hospital bed, uncertain if I would walk again, much less lead a company. Today, I stand before you, proof that our lowest moments can become the foundation for our greatest triumphs. What I didn't say, what remained between me and the titanium holding my spine together, was that Grant's betrayal had given me an unexpected gift. It had freed me from the gilded cage I'd built around myself, reminded me of who I was before I became Mrs. Grant Harmon, and returned me to the path I'd abandoned 18 years earlier. Sometimes, the deepest wounds carve space for the most profound healing. If this story resonated with you, please take a moment to hit that subscribe button. Every week, we share stories of resilience, transformation, and triumph over betrayal that remind us all of our capacity to rise from the ashes of our darkest moments. Leave a comment sharing your thoughts. Have you ever discovered unexpected strength when life forced you to fight back? Your story matters too, and this community is built on the courage we find in each other's journeys. Next week, I'll be sharing The Secret Inheritance That Saved Me, after my husband gambled away our life savings, another tale of betrayal transformed into triumph that you won't want to miss. Turn on notifications so you don't miss a single empowering story from our channel. Remember, sometimes the people who underestimate you do you the greatest favor. They give you the perfect opportunity to prove them wrong.